welcome back to DFC Books.
And welcome! Today we're doing something a bit different, a really specialized deep dive.
That's right. We are diving headfirst into the incredibly rich and often quite difficult world of Anacristina Rossi's novel, Limón Blues.
It's a powerful piece of writing.
Absolutely. And our goal today isn't just a quick summary. We're aiming for a really comprehensive explanation of the book, using the story itself as kind of our main source for understanding the history and the people involved.
So we'll be tracing the journeys of the main characters, their arcs.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, we're going to try and pinpoint that crucial, pivotal moment, the event that really defines each major chapter.
It's a great way to unpack the layers.
Yeah, if you're looking for a way to really get to grips with the politics, the economics, the whole spiritual landscape of Limón back in the early 20th century, this is definitely for you.
And the novel itself, its structure is really interesting and actually quite key to the story it tells.
Oh, so?
Well, the book we're digging into is actually the first part of a diptych, and it focuses solely on the historical Limón, the Limón experience by the Afro-Caribbean immigrants, mainly Jamaicans, who came to Costa Rica's Atlantic coast.
Right, starting way back in the 1870s.
Yeah, from the 1870s right through to the 1930s. And here's the structural quirk. The novel only includes the odd-numbered chapters.
Odd numbers only. Why?
The idea, it seems, is to symbolically root the story firmly in that specific, messy, unfolding historical reality of Limón itself, not a perfectly balanced narrative. It reflects the unevenness of their experience.
That makes sense. And the forces shaping that experience. They were huge, weren't they? Almost crushing.
Absolutely. You've got this constant driving search for identity, for just figuring out who you are in this new place. Then there's the relentless struggle for economic independence against these, massive foreign companies.
You mean Minor C. Keith and the United Fruit Company?
Yeah.
UFCO.
Exactly. The octopus, as they call it. Its shadow is just inescapable in the book. And then, layered on top of all that, you have the rise and ultimately the fall of Marcus Garvey's movement, the UNIA.
The Universal Negro Improvement Association. A huge source of hope, but also tragedy.
It really is. The whole novel is sort of a study in these big external dreams and aspirations colliding head-on with the harsh local realities.
Okay, let's start where the book starts, really. Let's unpack the main characters, the family at the heart of it all. Starting with the protagonist, Orlandus Robinson Reed. Who is he? Beyond just being a Jamaican immigrant.
Orlandus is, he's almost a classic tragic figure, isn't he? Because his whole life seems defined by this struggle over his identity. Who is he? The authorities are constantly rejecting him or questioning him.
So he's British by birth, right? A subject of the crown.
Yes, technically.
Yeah.
But he's largely self-taught, very intelligent, and driven by this growing political and social awareness. But it's a slow burn developing over years and years of facing prejudice.
Institutional prejudice.
Exactly. His entire life feels like this repeated battle against systems that just won't accept him.
Can you give us a specific example? How do these institutions push back against his identity?
Well, a really stark one comes later, when he's trying to get title to some land. He actually presents his official British documents, thinking, I'm a British subject, this gives me rights.
Makes sense.
But the local vice consul just brushes them off, dismisses them, says something like, as far as Costa Rican authorities are concerned, you're African, period.
Wow. So his legal status, tied to this global empire, meant nothing locally.
Nothing. Not when it came down to it. The local racial classification just overrode everything else. It's incredibly destabilizing, as you can imagine.
Utterly. And even his name. There's a story there, too, isn't there? How he became Orlandus Robinson Reed.
Yes, the book specifically mentions an encounter early on at the municipality, probably when he was trying to sort out his residency papers. He needed his mother's surname, Reed, for the official Republic records.
So it wasn't even his choice.
No, it seems like it was just a bureaucratic requirement. Another way, his identity was shaped from the outside. That's how Orlandus Robinson Reed came to be his official name.
Let's talk about his mother then, Nana Reed. She sounds like the real anchor of the family.
She is, definitely the quiet powerhouse. Arrived in 1876, fleeing, as the book says, absolute hunger in Jamaica, just desperate poverty. But she had this incredible inner strength, this resilience.
Reserved, the description says, but strong-willed.
Very, and incredibly adaptable. Think about how she learned Spanish. She taught herself. By reading the official orders the governor, Adolfo Escobar, posted on shop doors.
Orders that most of the other English-speaking immigrants probably just ignored.
Or couldn't read. But Nana figured it out. That shows you her Her mental flexibility right there.
And she turned that into real economic power, didn't she?
She did. She played a couple of roles. First, she was a cook, very successful apparently, cooking for all the single men flooding into the port for work.
Smart move.
But later, she really achieved independence as a farmer. When the family moves down the coast to Cahuita, she starts cultivating bananas and cacao. And she's smart about it.
How so? What was her strategy?
She didn't sell to the big company, to United Fruit. She bypassed them. She sold her produce directly to a goleta that's like a small coastal trading ship from Bocas del Toro down in Panama.
Ah, cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. It meant she wasn't trapped in their contract system, wasn't paid in those company coupons. She got cash, real money. And eventually, she formed a propel partnership with another independent farmer, Teodoro Ash. It gave her genuine autonomy.
That's fascinating. So why was selling to the goletas so much better, just avoiding the coupons?
It was about control, fundamentally. Selling to UFCO meant accepting their prices, their conditions, their whole system, which kept workers indebted. Selling to the goleta meant negotiating directly, accessing regional markets, getting paid properly. It showed she really understood local trade, not just plantation work.
But Nana wasn't just practical. She had this deep spiritual side, too, which caused problems with her husband, Prince.
Oh, big time. Nana was deeply rooted in Caribbean spiritual practices. The novel mentions things like jiggy, which are like local charms or spells, the powerman, a spiritual healer or worker, these mournful amber songs, and Mialism.
Okay, let's pause there. For listeners who might not know, what exactly is Mialism? And why did it clash so badly with Prince's beliefs?
Mialism is a traditional Afro-Jamaican religious practice. It's very focused on healing, on protection, and on actively fighting evil spirits, often called duppies. It sees the world as alive with spiritual forces that affect everything: luck, health, harvests.
So it's quite different from Orthodox Christianity.
Very. Even though it blends in some Christian elements, its core approach dealing with spirits, using charms, focusing on spiritual intervention in daily life was completely at odds with Prince's rigid, fundamentalist Christianity. He saw it as pagan, as evil. The book says he'd threaten her with his Bible, try to destroy her spiritual items. Real conflict there.
Let's quickly trace their beginnings then. Implicit Chapter 1 in the book covers their arrival in Port Limón in 1876. What's the key takeaway from that moment?
The defining thing is the sheer shock of the place, the filth, the chaos. They arrive on this disgusting ship, steerage deck covered in, well, urine and vomit. And Limón itself is barely a town. It's swampy, disease-ridden, full of brothels, rum cellars, Chinese opium dens, just raw and chaotic.
Sounds grim.
It was. But crucially, Nana, despite all that, sees potential. Potential for work, for a new life. And right away, she connects with Janet Bell, who becomes her lifelong friend and helps them find a little hut near the Cieneguita River.
So potential amidst the chaos, but then illness strikes, which leads to implicit Chapter 3, the move to Cahuita.
That's right. Orlandus's father, Prince, gets terribly sick. Yellow fever, maybe complicated by what Nana believed were duppies, evil spirits. She realizes the port is just too dangerous, too unhealthy.
So she acts decisively.
She does. Moves the family down the coast to Cahuita. And this is where she really comes into her own. She clears the land, builds a home, plants bananas and cacao, manages this whole finca basically single-handedly. That's her big achievement. Real economic independence, first selling to the goleta, then partnering with Ash.
While all this is happening, we need to understand the sort of political climate, this strange contrast between the local Costa Rican officials and this loony figure, Minor C. Keith.
Yeah, the contrast is really stark. You had the local governor, Adolfo Escobar. He was known for being pretty tolerant, kind of lax. The novel says he overlooked scandals and disorders, let Limón dance all night.
A bit laissez-faire.
Very. But his boss, this guy Leva, hated it. Criticized Escobar for being useless, for letting the town run wild without collecting taxes from all the bars and rum shops. So local rule was pretty loose.
And then there's Keith, the complete opposite. Nana called him a jangamanga, a great crapula.
Jangamanga, like a scoundrel, a rascal. Crapula suggests, excessive indulgence, debauchery. But whatever Nana thought of him personally, his power was just immense. The uncrowned king of Costa Rica, he really earned that title.
Because he didn't just build the railroad?
Oh, no. He built the railroad connecting the coast to San Jose, yes. But he also financed and built the capital's sanitation systems, its electricity, its telephone lines, its telegraphs. He basically built modern Costa Rica's infrastructure.
And how did he manage that?
land grants,
Mm.
huge land concessions in exchange for these projects. That's how he amassed enormous wealth and power, often directly at the expense of the immigrants, the very people whose labor built the railroad, but whose land rights were constantly being undermined. A totally different kind of empire builder. So, fast forward a bit, Orlandus is growing up, entering adulthood, and he keeps running into these same barriers, these systemic walls. Which brings us to implicit chapter 5, the challenge of work and identity.
Right, he's trying to make his way, build a career, but it's tough going. What's the key event here?
Well, he actually gets a decent job for a while. Assistant engineer, working under a Costa Rican supervisor. Things seem to be looking up.
Look.
But the supervisor gets sick, yellow fever again, he dies. And just like that, Orlandus is out of a job, unemployed again. And this comes after his earlier failure, the really defining one, trying to get land titles.
Because the Republic called black settlers' land baldios.
Exactly. Baldios. We need to unpack that word. It literally means empty, fallow, ownerless land.
But the land wasn't empty, was it? They were working it.
Of course not. They had cleared it, planted it, lived on it for years sometimes. But by legally classifying it as baldios, the Costa Rican state could just deny them ownership titles. It didn't matter if they were British subjects, didn't matter how much work they'd put in.
It was a legal trick, basically.
A legal mechanism to keep them in limbo. They were African when it suited the authorities to deny them land, but never Costa Rican enough to have rights. Just devastatingly unfair.
That kind of constant economic and political frustration, it must have built up incredible pressure. Seems like it explodes emotionally in implicit chapter 7, the affair in 1909.
Oh, this is a huge moment in the book, absolutely pivotal for Orlandus emotionally. He's feeling like an outsider, adrift, and he meets Leonor. She's described as a Panya woman at the train station.
Okay, we need to understand that term. Panya woman, Panya society. What does that mean in this context?
Panya society basically refers to the established white Costa Rican elite, middle and upper class, very conservative, very stratified, obsessed with social status, and, frankly, race. Leonor, as a Panya woman, is from the top tier of that society.
Like local aristocracy?
Pretty much, and she's married to Minister Joaquin, a very powerful political figure. But the novel portrays her as different, rebellious, smart, maybe intellectually stifled, bored by her own rigid social circle. She's looking for something more, some excitement, some connection outside that world.
So when she and Orlandus meet, it's not just infidelity, it's crossing massive social and racial lines.
Massive. It's a deeply intense affair, but very short-lived. And it's Orlandus's first real sexual experience. The impact on him is profound. It haunts him for years, literally a decade. The book says he felt a loss of sight, like he was left wounded and empty.
More than just heartbreak then.
It felt like a fundamental wound tied into the brutality of those social boundaries.
And those boundaries come crashing down when her husband finds out.
Minister Joaquin is absolutely furious, and the text makes it very clear his rage is fueled by the racial aspect. He shouts about her new lover is a black boy. It's that specific transgression that inflames him.
And he threatens Orlandus.
Threatens to kill him, tells Leonor if she ever sees Orlandus again, even just to say goodbye, he'll murder him. The message couldn't be clearer. Cross this line, challenge the racial order, and the consequences are potentially lethal.
Wow. While this intense personal drama is unfolding, there's this parallel story of collective struggle building up the rise of labor activism. What were the conditions driving that?
The working conditions were just appalling. Forget cash wages for many workers, especially on the plantations. They were paid in commissary coupons, company scrip.
Which they could only spend at the company store, right?
Right. And the book mentions these coupons were often discounted by 20% when used, so you're losing value immediately. On top of that, there was physical abuse, even torture by the foreman, and absolutely no legal rights, no recourse if you were cheated or beaten.
So who started organizing against this? Where did the pushback begin?
Interestingly, the churches played a big role, particularly Wesleyan pastors, like a figure named Waite Smith mentioned in the text. They started challenging the workers from the pulpit.
How?
By asking these really fundamental questions, trying to stir their consciousness. Things like, is there gray matter in here? Can we prove we are not animals? It was a moral call to action, framing the struggle in terms of dignity and humanity.
Yeah, it must have been powerful.
It was. It provided the spark, the moral backing needed for political organization, and that led directly to the founding of the Artisans and Laborers Union of Costa Rica. Key figures were men like Gutsmore, Sterling, and Ferguson.
And this new union leads to implicit chapter 9, the first strike, maybe holiday is a better word, and this assertion of British identity.
Yes, this is a really clever strategic moment. The Union decides they want to observe August 1st, which is Emancipation Day, a hugely significant date for people from the British Caribbean.
But the United Fruit Company wouldn't recognize it as a holiday.
They just ignored the request. Silence. So the Union decides to take matters into their own hands. They organize a respectful, self-declared holiday. The entire Jamaican community simply doesn't show up for work.
A mass action, but peaceful.
Completely peaceful. They gathered in Limón town instead, held a big orderly celebration, parades, speeches, celebrating their heritage, their freedom, their unity. It was a powerful statement.
How did the authorities react?
Well, the local military was sent to watch them, probably expecting trouble. But the crowd was so dignified, so organized, so determinedly peaceful, that the soldiers eventually just withdrew. There was nothing for them to do.
What lesson did Orlandis take from this?
For Orlandis, it was a crucial lesson. He'd seen before how violent things could get when Black people got involved in purely Costa Rican politics, supporting local candidates like Ricardo Jimenez. He saw them get beaten by the Pañas.
So this showed him a different way.
Exactly. It solidified his belief that trying to intervene in Costa Rican political fights was dangerous and probably futile. The better strategy, he concluded, was to focus entirely on asserting their rights as British subjects. Use that external identity, that connection to the crown, as a shield against the local oppression.
That makes sense. And that strategy, that identity focus, leads him into implicit chapter 11, where his personal life changes again and he connects with Marcus Garvey.
Right. He travels back to Jamaica for a conference. It's hosted by Dr. Robert Love, a significant political figure there. And at this conference, he meets Irene Barrett Lugo.
Tell us about Irene.
She's described as sharp, very pragmatic, a mulatto woman. Her background is Dominican and Cuban. She seems educated, grounded. Orlandis is still carrying the emotional weight from the Leonor affair, that deep wound.
And he sees Irene as different.
He sees her as an anchor, someone solid, practical. He's intensely drawn to her, perhaps precisely because she's so different from the tempestuous Leonor. He realizes she could be the stability he needs.
So they marry.
They do. And almost immediately after they marry, his political life ramps up dramatically. Marcus Garvey sends him a telegram. Garvey's launching his movement, the UNIA, and he needs Orlandis' help to get it started in Costa Rica. Big turning point. So the UNIA arrives in Limón, and it's like an explosion of activity, of organization, and a key focus right away is the press, using newspapers as a battleground for identity.
Orlandis already knew about this struggle, right?
Yeah.
From his earlier work with papers like the Limón Times.
Yes, the Limón Times and El Correo del Atlántico. He'd realized back then that the mainstream Costa Rican press completely ignored the Black community. Their churches, their social clubs, their lodges. So many lodges, fraternal societies, as the book notes, it was like they didn't exist in the official narrative.
So Garvey aims to change that.
Directly.
Yeah.
He actually establishes a dedicated section called The Nation within one of the main local papers, La Nación. And he writes for it himself using this very distinct style.
What was it like?
Very flowery, almost ornate English, but infused with Latin phrases and rhetoric. It was specifically designed to appeal to the Afro-Antillean population, to give them a voice, a sense of grandeur, although sometimes his pronouncements didn't quite land.
Like what?
Well, there's an example where Garvey tries to sort of sanitize the image of Limon's nightlife. He claims the nightly drumming wasn't about nihilism or any kind of African passion, just innocent cultural expression. But the novel points out the locals knew better. They knew the deep spiritual significance of those rhythms. Garvey was roundly mistaken, it says.
Interesting. So this period of intense organizing and hope leads into implicit chapter 13, a time of crisis, birth, but also a ghost from his past resurfacing, right when the UNIA is maybe at its peak influence.
Yes, it's a chapter packed with intense personal and political events happening almost simultaneously. On the home front, Irene gives birth to their daughter, Amends. But it's a traumatic birth. She nearly dies. The book says she felt she went to Olodumare, which is a reference to the supreme deity in Yoruba tradition, a near-death experience.
And while this is happening, Orlandis gets arrested.
He does. It's during the Tinoco dictatorship, a very repressive regime. They're cracking down on any perceived opposition. Orlandis, being a prominent UNIA leader, is an easy target. He gets jailed briefly as an anarchist Bolshevik.
Just lumped in with any potential troublemaker.
Yeah.
The description of jail sounds awful. So friggin' slow.
Yeah, just dragging on. But the truly shocking event, the personal turning point in this chapter, happens while he's locked up. He gets a visitor, a military officer, identified only as Lieutenant Rodriguez, and this officer seduces him. It's described as this moment of terrifying, unexpected intimacy and release for Orlandis in that place of powerlessness.
A military officer.
Yes, but later Orlandis realizes who it was. It was Leonor, his forbidden love from all those years ago. She was disguised in a military uniform.
Wait, Leonor. In disguise. How did she manage that? And why?
It speaks volumes about her status, doesn't it? As a Peña woman, she somehow had the nerve, the connections, maybe the money, to get a uniform and just walk into the jail. She used the symbol of male authority to gain access, to find him when he was completely vulnerable.
How did he know it was her?
He recognized her voice, her scent, her touch. Even through the disguise, that connection was unmistakable. It's this brief, intense, almost surreal reunion that confirms their bond is still there, however fraught and dangerous it is.
Incredible. Meanwhile, outside the jail, the UNIA is growing, but UFCO, the big company, is pushing back hard. Tell us about their counter-strategy.
UFCO, led by figures like George Chittenden and Hitchcock in the narrative, needed to break the power of the Jamaican Union, which the UNIA had strengthened. Their tactic was classic divide and conquer.
Yeah.
They imported hundreds of workers from St. Kitts Nevis, 725 men. And the way they were documented is chilling. The shipping manifests listed them as 725 bultos, sin marcas ni números.
725 bundles. Without marks and numbers. Dehumanizing.
Utterly, treating them like cargo, not people. And the whole point was to undercut the Jamaican workers. They paid the St. Kitts men half the wages the Jamaicans were getting and treated them terribly like dogs, the book says.
That's bound to cause conflict.
Inevitable. The St. Kitts workers, mistreated and exploited, eventually rioted. The situation escalated, troops were called in, they fired on the workers, and 2 men were killed. It was a disaster, clearly orchestrated to break the Union's solidarity.
So what did Orlandis and the Union leaders do? Did they appeal to the British again? That was their strategy, right?
They tried. They appealed to the British Crown, arguing these were British subjects being abused, killed even. They expected protection.
But it didn't come.
It completely failed. They end up dealing with the American consul, not even a British official, and he flat out tells them that, as far as Costa Rica is concerned, the Jamaican immigrants are considered Africans. And therefore, the British Crown wouldn't interfere in these local labor disputes.
So the shield of British identity just shattered.
Completely. They were abandoned, left totally exposed politically and legally. The strategy failed when they needed it most.
That must have been a massive blow. No wonder they turned inward, focusing on their own strength. Which leads to implicit Chapter 15 and the building of Liberty Hall.
Yes, Liberty Hall. Built in 1922, this becomes the absolute physical symbol of UNIA pride, unity, and aspiration in Limón. It was a huge collective effort, built entirely with donated labor and materials from the community.
A real monument to their own efforts.
Exactly. It represented the peak of that Garveyite optimism, that sense of collective racial power. And the UNIA organization itself reflected this. It had this very elaborate structure, almost like a fraternal society or a Masonic lodge.
Titles and roles.
Oh, yes. Presidents, vice presidents, lady presidents, executive boards. A whole hierarchy designed to give members status, recognition, a sense of belonging.
But while all this collective building is going on, Orlandis' personal life gets even more complicated because of Leonor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That jailhouse reunion had consequences. He finds out that Leonor gave birth to a son, Ignacio, back in 1922, his son. It confirms that deep, ongoing, secret connection between them.
And this happens while he's a major leader in the UNIA.
Yes. And despite his public role, he still carries this deep insecurity about his education, about being self-taught. He feels inferior.
And he confesses this to Leonor.
He does. And her response is just brutal in a way. She agrees with him, says something like, yes, te faltan conceptos generales.
You lack general concepts. Ouch, that must have cut deep.
Devastating, especially coming from her. It basically confirmed his worst fear that he wasn't intellectually equipped, that he'd always be somehow lesser, even while leading this mass movement.
That insecurity must have followed him to the U.S. then. For implicit Chapter 17, the big UNIA convention in Harlem in 1924.
It absolutely shapes his experience there. He goes to New York, meets the UNIA leadership, the intellectuals, the ebony sages, as the book calls them, editors, writers, Ivy League graduates.
And he feels out of his depths.
Totally overwhelmed. He feels like a country bumpkin compared to these sophisticated Harlem figures. But it's there he has this really interesting moment of self-discovery connected to music.
Jazz and blues.
Exactly. He hears this music and a piano player explains the concept of the bemol, the flat note in music. The musician tells him the flat note is sad, yes, but it's also deeper, more complex, more expressive.
And Orlandus connects with that.
He has this epiphany. He realizes he is an hombre en bémol, a man in the flat key. Melancholy, introspective, attuned to the sadness, the complexity of life.
As opposed to Garvey.
As opposed to Garvey's relentless optimism, his boosterism, which Orlandus sees as the sostenido, the sharp note, always pushing upward, maybe ignoring the depths. This realization, this contrast, kind of foreshadows the problems ahead.
And the biggest problem, the ultimate political failure, hits him directly in implicit Chapter 19, the devastating setback in 1925.
This is the moment the whole Pan-African dream really crashes and burns, at least for Orlandus. He's given this huge responsibility. Go to Liberia, pave the way for UNIA settlers, prepare for repatriation. It's the culmination of everything.
But it goes wrong.
Catastrophically wrong.
Right.
Right from the moment they arrive. The Liberian government refuses to cooperate. Maybe they were suspicious of Garvey, maybe pressured by European colonial powers, who knows? But they shut the door. Flat refusal.
And the supplies.
Yeah.
The materials they sent.
They vanished. Machinery, equipment, $50,000 worth of stuff just gone. Disappeared. Whether it was confiscated, stolen, mismanaged, it's a total disaster.
What does this do to Orlandus?
It breaks him, completely shatters his spirit. He collapses physically and mentally. Deep depression sets in, high fever, this crushing fatigue and malaise. He describes his body feeling heavy, like it refuses to obey his will. All it wants to do is weep. El cuerpo lo único que quiere es llorar.
His mother tries to explain it spiritually.
Yeah, Nana suggests his spirit left him because his courage failed, but Orlandus knows it started physically, viscerally, the moment that Liberian officials said no. It was the sheer weight of that collapsed hope crushing him.
So that cracking failure sort of bleeds into the next decade, the 1930s. And then you have the Great Depression hitting globally, plus internal problems in the UNIA. The outline mentions corruption, specifically President Stanley Dixon.
Right. Things are looking bleak. The momentum is gone. Yet despite all this, the movement attempts one last grand gesture, a final repatriation voyage.
Which leads to this incredibly haunting scene in implicit Chapter 21, The Great Silence, in January 1930.
It's one of the most powerful, almost surreal images in the novel. Describe it for us.
It happens during a citywide blackout. Total darkness, except for the moonlight, and this huge, silent procession of Garveyites makes its way through the dark streets to Liberty Hall.
Silent.
Completely silent. The description is amazing. Women dressed elegantly, some in moire fabric, but walking barefoot. Like pilgrims, men in their full UNIA uniform, sashes, embroidered aprons. They board this ship, the SS Lion of Judea, probably a small charter vessel.
Likely. And the ship just sails away into the darkness and vanishes. No word, no signal, nothing. Limón is left feeling totally vacío, completely empty.
Wow. It's like the dream itself just sailed away and disappeared.
Exactly. It's the symbolic end, the definitive silent collapse of the UNIA dream in Costa Rica, just gone.
So with the movement collapsed and Orlandus basically incapacitated by illness and despair, Irene has to step up, doesn't she? She transforms.
She absolutely does. She becomes the pragmatist, the survivor. With Orlandus unable to provide, she takes charge of the family's finances. She starts a hotel business.
Where does she get the money for that?
Interestingly, the seed money comes from Dr. Zimmerman. Remember him, the American doctor.
Her former lover.
Yes. He gives her the capital just before he leaves Limón himself, heading off to Palestine, or what would become Israel, to help build the Jewish state there. Another fascinating historical layer.
So Irene focuses on business, on survival. Does she also distance herself from the past in other ways?
She does. She starts shedding burdens. Her cousin, Talita, tries to pull her deeper into Orisha practices, the spiritual traditions, but Irene pushes back. She finds it too demanding, too many rituals, too many obligations, and she's explicitly fearful of the blood sacrifice involved.
So practical needs trump spiritual ones.
For her, yes. Survival comes first, and she makes a crucial decision about identity. She realizes relying on being British is useless, the African dream is dead. What she needs, what her family needs to survive in Costa Rica is Costa Rican identity.
So she applies for citizenship.
She files for her naturalization papers. She decides to anchor herself locally, legally within the Costa Rican system, a purely pragmatic move.
What about Sam Nation, Orlandus's old friend and colleague? How does he react to all this collapse?
Nation goes the other way. He digs in his heels. He becomes the absolute, unwavering champion of Britishness, of tradition.
He becomes Orlandus's support system, doesn't he?
He does. He visits Orlandis constantly, reads to him, but he's also arguing passionately that the only way to resist the humiliation they face from Costa Ricans is to cling fiercely to British culture. The lodges, the debates, the English schools. He keeps insisting, we are Britishers. We know we are superior to them in refinement. That identity is his armor.
Two very different survival strategies emerging from the same disaster. But despite nation support, Orlandis doesn't recover, does he? The end is coming.
No, his decline continues over years. Which brings us to the final stages, the character endings. Irene thinking about her children's future. She sees the writing on the wall, especially with this new law, Clausula 8.
Okay, Clausula 8. The outline mentions it briefly. What exactly did that do? Why was it so significant?
Clausula 8 was a piece of Costa Rican legislation that basically slammed the door shut on economic opportunity for black workers outside of Limón. It specifically prohibited them from working on the Pacific coast, where new developments and jobs were opening up.
So it trapped them in Limón.
Effectively, yes. It was blatant, institutionalized racism, limiting their mobility and economic prospects. Irene sees this and knows her kids. Kate, Amence, Denmark have no real future there. So she arranges for them to go abroad, to the U.S. with scholarships, gives them a chance she knows they won't get at home.
A tough decision, but pragmatic again. And then Orlandis' final moments. Around 1935.
Yes. After years battling recurring malaria, the deep depression, and what's diagnosed as cancer, he finally dies. His last words are apparently shouted at his half-brother, Prince. He affirms his love for their father, but then calls himself, just like his father, a piltrafa humana.
A human wretch. That's just heartbreaking. Such a brutal self-assessment at the very end. Where does that profound sense of failure come from?
It's the accumulation, isn't it? Failing to get land, the trauma with Leonor, the collapse of the UNIA, seeing his political life's work end in illness and despair instead of liberation. It's the weight of it all. He dies right in the middle of a sentence, just falls. And then, adding to the tragedy, his half-brother, Prince, who'd been ranting about their father, dies almost immediately after, and nobody even notices right away because they're grieving Orlandis.
Wow. But the funeral itself, it sounds like it manages to bring together the different threads of his life, offer some kind of catharsis.
It does. It's a real blend. You have the formal UNIA elements, speeches by figures like Francis, the Masonic lodges participate, but the most powerful part seems to be Nana's contribution.
His mother's spiritual traditions finally take center stage.
Yes. She leads this intense revival ceremony, rain songs, deep mourning, women dancing in white and red dresses. It's ancient, powerful, and steeped in the very tradition she defended against Prince all those years. And the novel notes it's this ceremony, this deep spiritual expression, that finally brings Irene a sense of peace, of release from her double loss.
And Irene herself. What's her final act in Limón?
She gets what she worked for. Her final Costa Rican citizenship papers. She's achieved that local anger. And then Sam Nation makes this unexpected gesture, invites her for one last dance on a ship, the SS Craigois. Shortly after, around 1940, she leaves Limón. She's survived the storm by adapting, by choosing pragmatism and local identity over those grand external dreams that broke Orlandis. She found a different way home. Hashtag outro. When you step back and look at Lemon Blues, the central irony is just so stark, isn't it? Orlandis, the protagonist, pours everything into collective action, into this grand vision of return, of liberation, and it utterly breaks him body and soul.
Yeah, while the ones who ultimately survive, who find a way forward, are the adapters, like Irene, the ultimate pragmatist who secures her place through business and local citizenship.
Or maybe even someone like Sam Nation, who survives by retreating into this fierce, almost rigid adherence to British tradition. Or Nana, whose earlier independent success gave her a foundation. Survival seemed to belong to the adaptable or the already grounded.
What really strikes me reading through this is how relentlessly the lives of the people in Limón, their internal worlds, their local economy, were just dominated by these huge external forces.
Constantly. UFCO controlling the jobs and land, the British Crown defining their legal status, until it didn't, Marcus Garvey shaping their highest hopes and dreams.
Their identity was always being forged against or in response to these outside pressures. Never really on their own terms, it feels like.
Which leads to a really interesting, kind of provocative question the novel leaves us with, leaves you, the listener, with, I think. Consider this. The physical things left behind by Minor Seakeith. The railroad, the ports, the sanitation systems that stuff remained. It became the lasting infrastructure of modern Limon.
Right, the concrete stuff.
But the political and cultural infrastructure built by the Afro-Antillians themselves, the Union, the UNIA, Liberty Hall itself, that largely collapsed. It vanished. Sometimes, like that ship, the Lion of Judea, it disappeared without a trace, leaving only silence, leaving Limon feeling totally vacío.
So what's the question then?
What does that tell us about what lasts? About the difference between material foundations and cultural or political ones, especially when faced with overwhelming economic power or political disappointment. When the Lion of Judea sails off into the darkness and is never heard from again, what kind of foundations truly endure? It's something to think about.